eliminate the 60-day deadline to file tax return for property, personal property.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second that we amend Chapter 103, Section 103-43-1, the Code of Caroline as presented. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the motion carries. That takes us to unfinished business. A rezoning for 03-2014 NNP 4 Ladysmith LLC owner applicant.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I think you've received a couple of emails and a couple of different updates to the rezoning request and for the proffer amendments for what I'll collectively refer to as the Ladysmith Village rezoning. We've actually been talking to clarifying things as late as right now between the attorneys to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the language. You held your public hearing on this request at your last meeting, and we received some comments from board members at that meeting. You have an updated sheet in your packet which identifies all the changes that have been discussed, with the exception of perhaps the latest attempt to clarify the South River discussion. My recollection of our questions from the last meeting, there was a question related to the density in South River. As you recall, the current South River zoning was all single-family detached, which was a separate zoning issue from what is now Ladysmith Village. As part of this overall development concept, the density was being reallocated throughout the entire properties owned by Newland, without any increase in the overall number of units. But we had some concerns about the impacts to the existing South River single-family detached. And I think we've tried to address those questions raised by the board. I think we need to hear from the board whether we've done that adequately. I think we've tried to clarify the park improvements as well. I don't know that we've got that nailed down to everybody's satisfaction. If you remember the original proffer, the county was to reimburse the applicant for the improvements to the park. The revised proffer removes that obligation. The applicant will still provide us 10 or 15 acres, as well as additional cash towards those improvements. We also had a question about the minimum townhouse size. That is not in the proffer statement itself, but it's in the urban regulations, which are part of the development regulations. So each townhouse type specifies the minimum square footage. The regulating plan is referenced in the proffers. With that, I'm sure there are more questions. I'll be happy to try to address any questions that the board may have.
Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Fincham, this is, I guess, a continuation of the last meeting that we had. We talked about the proffers, and we tried to narrow or nail down the difference, basically, in what's being proposed and what's already approved without approving this. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the board has some questions, okay?
And I guess my question before we get into it, and I've talked with staff members, and from what I can glean from what I've talked, or whom I've talked to, that staff seems to be, I guess for lack of a better term, satisfied with the changes that have been made, or at least with the way the changes have been addressed. Now, I know it's a board decision, and I understand that. But personally, I depend on staff for technical things of this nature, more so than I depend on my own understanding, since that's not what I do on a regular basis. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, before we get into the question answer period, how do you feel as a staff member that you have addressed what you feel the board's concerns were in the first place?
I think let me answer it this way. Compared to the proffers in place now, the zoning that's currently in place on the two projects versus the proffers that are proposed, as a whole, I think these proffers are improved over what's in place now. As an example, and I'm sure there are individual questions that still need to be addressed, but in terms of the big picture, I think the proffers that are proposed, the whole development process is substantially improved over what's in place now. The park is an example where we're no longer reimbursing the developer for park improvements. We get to keep those cash proffers and utilize them for other impacts. But in addition to that, the developer has offered to actually provide additional cash to the county to make those improvements, as well as we get to keep the proffers that we were to reimburse before. Administratively, I think the language is significantly improved over the current set of development regulations and regulating plans that govern the property currently. There's a number of inconsistencies. So in terms of the big picture, I think what we have now, yes, is better than what's already in place. Having said that, I'm sure you all have questions and issues that you want addressed, and I understand that.
Okay, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Philosophically, I think when you have a proper arrangement for rezoning, you're basically saying this is the deal I would like to make. And I don't like to change those deals, period. But in this case, it appears that the applicant is saying, I'm going to offer you a better deal, and based on your explanation, that's my understanding. So I will take that first as a reference point. But the question I have is condition F, where they are discussing the amount of residential units and when they're going to make changes to Durrett Road. And we've had discussions with the school board and those in that area who thought that should be taken care of quickly. They're saying at the 1,350th unit, they will start things. How many units do they have now?
It's around 500 because we've got some single-family detached and townhouses. So in both communities, both neighborhoods,
So we're
roughly 500. So we're
a little more
40,
than a third. Yeah. 40% sounds like a good number, too. And Ladysmith Village has been here for 10 years.
From 2005 to
theoretically, based on that same process, it would be 20 more years before we got any modification to Durrett Road. So I'm just wondering, you can't say anything, but I'm just wondering if the applicant would be willing to make that number a little less voluntarily, because that's what proffers are. Just wondering out loud, hoping somebody would respond.
But Mr. Thomas, we want to make sure that we don't violate.
We're not violating because they would be volunteering. That's why I'm just talking out loud to Mr. Fincham.
Well, I don't know that it's, I mean, if the developer wanted to proffer, certainly whatever, but since the public hearing has already started, we would have to go back through the public hearing process and amend the proffers in writing and sign.
They could improve them without us going back.
We would have to, because the public hearing's already been opened, any material changes, we'd have to re-advertise the public hearing for the amendments to proffer.
We did the public hearing. We're not doing the public hearing now.
I mean, but it's already been open and closed.
So any changes?
But Mr. Thomas, the council has spoken.
Yeah, but then what she's saying is any changes they made since the public hearing to now are null and void.
No.
Based on
If
what
you're
you
if you're
said.
asking if they were to make additional proffers, once the public hearing has been open, and you're right, I had forgotten because I wasn't here at the last meeting, but the public hearing's been open and closed. So any changes now to the proffers would have to be re-advertised.
So you're saying there were no changes between then and now?
You can make technical clarifications. I think the issue is a standard of a material change.
Right.
I think what we've been trying to do is clarify up to this point so that we don't go outside the boundary of what is a new material change, proffer, okay? For example, we're transferring density into South River. We're trying to clarify the parameters of that density adjustment.
Understand that. So we're not clarifying the expedience of Durrett Road being repaired?
Well, I mean, I think it would depend on
I am.
what the, I mean, if it's a change versus a clarification. I mean, so,
But if
I mean-
but if the applicant were to say, I think that's a good idea, I'll be happy to do it, we could do it.
but you would, depending on how material change, again, it would have to go back through the public hearing process.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any more questions, Mr. Thomas?
No, not at all.
Okay. Mr. Black?
Yeah, I've just got a couple. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page on this. As far as the neighborhood of South River, which they're bringing all in, what is the number and the percent of townhomes that they can have, that they can build in South River? I know I beat this and I beat this, but I just want to know, I'd like to know the percentage and the number.
Ms. Cosby was just having that discussion, so I had to make sure that she was comfortable, so I'm going to ask her to respond to that.
Yes, we were trying to clarify this even a little bit tighter for you. And, I mean, the answer is 24% max, and I would defer to if I'm getting this wrong, but 24% max for the parcels that are the current South River neighborhood, i.e. 52A33 and 5223. I do have just a slight modification to the language that the developer and council have agreed to, just to clarify that within any neighborhood that would include South River. So, for example, if it's split, you'd have a whole number of townhomes, but 24% of those, not more than 24%, could be in the half of South River. So the remainder of whatever that is would be somewhere else, but it wouldn't be in South River. So
Okay.
I think that with just a little technical change of language.
Now, piggybacking on that, what about apartments? Can they do the apartments? Because they can do apartments in Ladysmith Village right now. I don't know if they have any in there, but they technically can. So could they go 24% apartments too?
Well, I believe that any other residential
It'd be
units.
24% of any other
Other.
type of unit.
Which, yes, would be apartments, townhomes, anything other than single-family, yes.
So we could have technically 48% apartments and townhomes.
No, the maximum number in South River is 24%.
24% total? For total, okay. Now we're on the same page. All right. And we do have a minimum square footage on these townhomes, correct?
The minimum square footage is in the urban regulations. I believe, and I may be wrong, we sent the urban regulations out with the first zoning packet when you had your public hearing. I did not send, in an effort to comply with the IRS Paperwork Reduction Act, I did not send out a full set of those regulations. Just a joke.
Okay, I was going to say, IRS paper reduction, yeah, all right.
But yes, in each townhouse type, we have urban regulations, okay, which speaks to the type of unit to be constructed. Speaks to the type of lot, the length, width of the lot, the type of unit that can go on to that lot. Those lot types are even tied to the street type. This is consistent with the original Ladysmith Village zoning. Each townhouse type has the limitation, the living area for each townhouse shall be a minimum of 1,400 square feet. Okay?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I guess I'd like to say, I think the applicant has done a great job as far as complying with what the county wishes. My only concern, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not ready to vote on this tonight, and the only reason is I'd like for us to nail down the piece of land, because agreed upon after, I mean, we have to debate the 10 or 15, we've got two different things. I'd like to actually specifically get a piece of land that we agreed upon before we vote on this. I mean, that's a big thing, number one. And number two, a lot of this stuff came to us last night, and this is a lot to look over one day before a board meeting. So if we're going to vote on this in March, I would like to see it to be 100% comfortable. I'd like to see this, before the Monday before the board meeting where we vote on it. So that's a difficult thing to ask us to require us to look all over this stuff one day before.
I agree. I understand.
Thank you.
Mr. Underwood?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can I ask the applicant a question?
Certainly.
If the applicant can come forward.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Gloria Fry. I'm an attorney from McGuire Woods here on behalf of the applicant, and this is Bob Didart, who's the senior project manager with Newland.
Yeah. My question is, I've listened to Mr. Fincham discuss the benefits to the county, which we're awful gracious that you would do that. But somewhere in the back of my mind says you wouldn't do this unless there was a benefit for you as well. So can you discuss that for me a little bit?
Yes, sir, and I spoke to that the last time I was here, about 2 weeks ago. The reason that Newland undertook this year-and-a-half-long exercise, and we do want to thank Ms. Cosby and Mr. Fincham and their staff. They have worked with us for, it's been about a year and a half, looking at the existing zoning and just trying to figure it out and to clean it up and to make it more workable. But the reason that Newland was willing to go to that expense and to put that kind of time into it was for three reasons. The first thing that motivated them to finally do something about this current state of zoning was they were just bleeding money for the having to use public water for the irrigation of the exorbitant number of plants that they have. I mean, that every month the company saw that money just going out the door, out the door, out the door, and then they had to pay the money to replace the landscaping to be in compliance. So finally they said, we got to do something about this. We need to open this zoning can of worms, we just have to. The second reason was they saw the benefit that if they own both South River and they own Ladysmith Village, it was in their best interest to have South River develop to the same standards and quality that Ladysmith Village is. To do that, we had to pull that land, that 160 acres, into the PMUD. So that's changing the PRD on South River to PMUD. That gives them the same quality of standards and puts the South River development under the same review process and standards, and that made it a lot better for staff as well. The third reason was because they had that additional land, they could spread that density. Surprisingly, today is February 10, 2015. The Ladysmith Village was approved on February 10, 2003. I can't just believe it. I don't know how that happened. But the zoning then projected that this development was going to happen over 12 years. And the county said, we're not going to let it happen more than 12 years. We need to manage the growth so that we don't overtax our citizens with demands on services, with schools, with utilities, with water. But that was the zoning then. You know, things have changed so much. And as you pointed out, or somebody pointed out, how long it's taken for the development to get to where it is today with the number of units that they have. But there are so many factors that contribute to that with the recession and the housing industry. So those were the reasons that Newland has stuck in there and said, yes, we know we're opening ourselves up for this to be re-examined, but the benefits for Newland and the benefits for the county are going to make it worth it.
Thank you very much. And I guess then the overall arching goal is to speed up the development there in Ladysmith Village.
Yes,
would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir. They would love to be building more houses.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Akins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've gone over these extensively as to the changes they've made, and we talk about the park, the location of the park, and I guess that my concern is why we're looking to be specific today where the park goes when next year it could be 6 new people sitting up here on this board, and they're either going to say, and they could say, we don't even want the park, we're going to sell the land. So it's in the proffers that it has to be agreed upon between the board and the developer as to where the property is. And so I don't know that trying to tie it down now is to benefit. It does say in the proffer also that it must be property that they own. And so it has to be somewhere in that Ladysmith Village area, whether it's on Gatewood Road, whether it's on Route 1, whether it's on, and I don't know if you own any property on Route 1 at this point that a park will go on, or on 639, or internal of Ladysmith Village. And I would not want to see it internal of Ladysmith Village because it's a county park. And so I'd like to see it somewhere outside of the Ladysmith area, Ladysmith Village area. But again, I don't know if that makes a lot of difference as to why we should not vote on these changes that are being made. They've addressed every issue. Now, as far as Durrett Road, Mr. Thomas, Bob, can I talk about that? Mr. Ditterhart and I, we've talked, and he has gotten his people to agree to chip and tar. Now, understand it's a chip and tar. It's not a asphalt roadway, but at least it gets rid of the ruts, it gets rid of the dust, it gets rid of the mud and those things. But they have agreed by September, I believe it is, to chip and tar Durrett Road from Begonia Avenue, I believe it is, a street, up to where the YMC has been paved. So it takes that in, and it does improve. I think they've done everything they possibly could do. They've done everything that I think this board has asked them to do to accommodate what they're wanting out of this.
Is that agreement?
It is not a proffer. There's a letter coming from Mr. Ditterhart just saying that, but there's a letter coming to that commitment that they are doing it. That's correct, Bob. So I mean, it's something that's going to be done, and this has been going on a long time. We have had it now for at least 2 weeks, and I would just hope that this board would say, hey, we trust staff enough that they are going to protect the county's interest to go ahead and vote on this issue today.
Mr. Seeley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back to Durrett Road because in the board packet, in the current case, and this was Ladysmith Summary of Zoning, it says commitment to improve Durrett Road in phases if off-site right-of-way available. I guess I don't know what that means. Because I thought you owned all the property on both sides of Durrett Road, all the way past the YMCA. Mr. Finch, I mean, I don't know who answers this, but that's my first question.
They don't even want it from Route 1 to Begonia.
Is this the phase that you're referring to, Mr. Sealer?
I'm just referring to what's written in the board packet.
In the board pack. Okay. The right-of-way issue is in front of the property between their property and Route 1. There is probably a 30-foot section of right-of-way / easement between their property and Route 1 that would require additional acquisition of land, which has been discussed in the past, related to the improvement of that section from their property out to Route 1, which is this phasing plan that I know we had it in the first public hearing packet. I'm not sure what it was.
Well,
That's what it speaks to, Mr. Seal.
And this is in the second packet, what you're referring to.
Right, the summary.
I guess, here's my question. Is there what is the obligation to the off-site right-of-way to Newland to actually fix Durrett Road? Because my understanding is they've got to actually relocate Durrett Road at some point in time. Does that change with these proffers? The relocation of the route?
No, sir. And it's not a complete relocation. It is a modification of the alignment of Durrett Road, which actually is shown even with the section or phase 1, the Founders Park. It's actually delineated where that right-of-way is to be in part relocated. If you drive out Durrett Road, for example, you're driving westbound and you see the Library Boulevard intersection and the YMCA over on the south side, that area in between is in part where Durrett Road gets relocated as part of the ultimate improvements to that road.
I guess I'm going to go, is there any obligation to actually purchasing or improving Durrett Road at the intersection of Route 1 and Durrett?
If you go to proffer 4, beginning with subparagraph F. It specifies the phases that are shown in this schematic. So what is shown as F1 would be phase 1 as shown on this schematic. If you get down to...
Yeah, but that still only talks from Founders Park to Begonia Drive.
That's phase 1.
And that's at 1,350?
Yes, sir, which is currently undefined.
Okay, so the obligation is at 1,500 to provide the right-of-way adjacent to Route 1?
Yeah, I think that speaks to Mr. Thomas's concerns about the phasing of Durrett Road.
Okay.
It also speaks to if they are unsuccessful in working with the property owners, we can assist utilizing our abilities to help secure that right-of-way and get reimbursed by the applicant for our expense. So if there's a situation where the property owners weren't willing to do it, either they're relieved of the obligation or the county can assist in securing the right-of-way to ensure that those improvements are completed.
Okay, I mean, the only thing, I mean, I have 3 sets of proffers up here. I have the set of proffers from the 6th of January, the 9th of January, and the 10th of January.
I have 12 sets.
And I just want to read them. I mean, and I'm going to go to the comment of, I read the radio system contract. I found 2 Chapter 7s, one in Chapter 1, one in Chapter 7. When I asked which one was viable, you know, there was a discussion. All I want to do is read it for my own. I'm not saying I'm an expert at this. I just want to see what it says for my own understanding and for my own familiarity with what we're doing. Other than that, I don't know that I have any.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's going to kill Newland if we postpone this until March the 10th. I would ask and I would trust. Now, I think this board needs to understand that Newland can say, hey, I'm willing to pay the $25,000 a year that I pay on my water bill, and I'm going to walk away from any changes that we want to make here. I don't think any one of us sitting up here could justify allowing that to happen because it improves the proffer system that is in fact in place today. And I don't think any of us want to throw away $500,000 at this point or any of the other proffer changes that they have made. This is much better than what we've had in the past. I don't believe that Newland is going to go back and entertain anything else on these proffers. I don't know if they can afford to do that. At some point, there has to be a breaking point where they say, it's better for me paying this $25,000 a year for as long as we're involved, and then when the homeowners take over, they've got to fight that battle, and they're going to walk away from what they have recommended to change here. Again, I'm saying let's postpone it until March the 10th, but I would trust and hope that this board would come prepared to say yes or no, we're not willing to make these changes, and we're not willing to open this the proffers back up or any of the other changes, and we go home and just say, okay, it was a good effort and a good fight, but we either lost or won. That's what we want to concern.
Mr. Akers, I would just say at this point, I've heard concerns. Mr. Thomas's concern certainly is valid. He talks about the red road, but then I've heard the developer say he's going to fix the road.
He's going to temporarily.
Yeah, not necessarily asphalt the road, but he's going to make major improvements to the road. Mr. Black's concerned about the location of the park. And I too understand that. The only thing I'm saying is, personally, things change so fast. They may come back and say the park is going to be in a particular place, and 5 years down the road, when they get ready to do the park, or whenever they get ready to do the park, that may not be the best place. So, I think that we have a real plan here. I think it's obvious that they are willing to do what's necessary to enhance this project and to make it continually a viable project. And based on their past involvement in the county, they've got a good record. They're not people that have not done a good job and that we're not satisfied with. So unless there are just other major opposition, and I haven't heard any opposition that was a deal killer. So I don't know why
Mr. Chairman,
we don't just vote on it.
The votes are not there tonight to get 4 votes on this issue because of whatever the reason. But I don't want to see it die tonight, and I think we need to push it off to the 10th. And again, asking everybody come prepared to say, yes or no that night. Let's not say
And I
we
think,
have other issues.
and I think that the issue, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Akers, has really nothing to do with the proffers and what they're presenting. We would just like to be able to do our due diligence and read and understand and come back as an educated board. Remember, we've only had this just for a few hours to read. We talked about it at our last meeting. And I think it would be incumbent upon us that we look at it from an educated point of view, that I don't think any of us are against the profit. I don't think that's an issue. But to allow the process to work through, give us an opportunity to do our jobs professionally, I would recommend that we push it back till our next meeting and let us read it. Not because we're against it, because we want to do our due diligence.
Okay. And I understand that. Okay, thank you.
March 10th. We'll be back on
Mr.
the-
Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Is there a way, I mean, and going along with Mr. Underwood said, is there a way that we can get these well in advance rather than the Monday? I mean, are the final proffers going to be sent to us well, I mean, or is this the copy of the final proffers we got tonight? Or are we still going to be going through negotiations and, I mean, or there's still going to be technical changes and so forth and getting copies? I mean, I guess that's the thing.
I will ensure, yeah, I mean, and it was evidenced by us making sure that we were on the same page tonight as well. I would say we have it to you at least a week before the meeting.
Okay, and to go along with that, would it be difficult, because the proffer does as a mutually agreed upon place, would that be a difficult thing to get with them as far as here's the land that they already control? Would that be a difficult thing to sit down and say, this is the particular land that we're looking at?
Or at least identify multiple sites.
Pardon?
Or at least identify multiple sites. You could give an A, B, and C. This
Right.
is where it could go.
Areas,
Areas.
we can discuss that.
That-
Because realistically, the board has to agree upon sites as well. So 4 of you have to agree on a site under the current proffers.
Right, but we're not going to make that, I mean, we're not going to make that determination without them saying, here's
These sites
here's the
are-
site. Right.
We can have those discussions, yes, sir.
Thank you.
And one question.
Mr. Thomas?
And we're also, I know March 10th would give us time to have a public hearing and advertise, but that's probably not going to happen. We would also be assured we'd have the letter regarding the Rhett Road before then? Before March 10th? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, he's-
Any questions, if you could get those to me after you look at the materials, if any board member has any additional clarifications or questions, if you could get that to me, then it will help me try to get the final documents to you a week before the board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Fincher.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, that takes us to agenda item 9, discussion of Fort A.P. Hill Joint Land Use Study Report. Mr. Fincher.
Mr. Chairman, you have at your desk tonight a copy of the final draft document from the Fort A.P. Hill Joint Land Use Study process. I am not going to spend a lot of time discussing it tonight. I simply wanted to present a copy to the board for you to look at. The end product was, I think, somewhat different than what we thought it would be at the beginning of the process. There was a lot of discussion throughout the process. There were a lot of concerns and issues that were raised. Some were addressed, some ultimately were not, which I think speaks to the final document itself, and that each chapter in the document reflects the thoughts, issues, areas of importance, et cetera, of each individual community, versus a joint document coming out reflecting the consensus of all of the participating entities. So I think this is a somewhat unique document in that it's not necessarily one voice, but multiple voices in the final product. So anyway, really, this is the presentation to the board of the draft document for you to look at, for you to review, and we can discuss this in greater detail at the next board meeting if you desire, in terms of the direction the board wants to go in going forward with this document.
Okay. Since the board has just received this tonight, we can certainly put it on the agenda for our March meeting, and we can discuss particulars at that time. That takes us to new business. Agenda item number 10, proposed acceptance of Rescue Squad Assistance Fund grant for replacement of defibrillators. Chief Loftus.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening.
Good evening.
With your permission, I'd like to answer Mr. Thomas's question first, if I may, from the opening comments.
Yes, sir.
With regard to our transportation policy on EMS calls, where we transport patients, about 2004 we codified that in policy. It's been a long-standing practice in this county to use what's called patient's choice. And when we pick up someone via ambulance, we use the patient's choice policy. If the patient is a stable patient, we ask them, where would you like to be transported? We have a list of facilities in the region that we transport to, and I can give you some statistics what that is. If the patient is not stable or could become potentially unstable on the ride, we take them to the closest appropriate medical facility. If they need specialized care, we'll take them to a trauma center, obviously, dialysis if they need that for some reason. And the newest thing now is to bring you to a cath lab directly rather than going to the ER based on certain conditions. But I have some data for you from last year, 2014. The closest medical facility, we transported 40% of our patients to that. Patient's choice, family choice, and physician's choice accounted for 51% of the total transports and the destination that was chosen. Any questions?
Could I just follow up on the genesis of that? I got a call from a constituent, well, from someone in Mr. Seeley's district, as a matter of fact, and they live in the Sparta Central Point area. They were going, I think I explained it to you when I asked the question, they were going to Fredericksburg. Their doctor was at Mary Washington, but the ambulance driver stopped them at Spotsylvania, regional or whatever, because it was the first one they came to. And you've explained if the patient is coherent, I guess, or
stable. Not so much coherent, but they are medically stable.
Yeah, coherent is kind of questionable anyhow.
Yeah.
If the patient is stable, then they have patient choice.
That's correct.
If they're not stable, of course, the first trauma center you can take them to them is kind of where you're going to go.
First appropriate medical.
Yeah, first medical.
The times that changes are, there's a few conditions when that'll change.
That was the thing.
All right, so if the status of our system is depressed, we don't have enough ambulances, or the system is stressed out, we only staff 3 ambulances, we'll bring you to the nearest facility so we can get that ambulance back in the district. Weather, we often reduce where you go based on the weather conditions. If we know there's snow, we're transporting to the closest medical facility as well. Keep in mind 2 things. That policy has some pros and cons. The pros, you get a much more emotionally stable patient when you bring them to that facility. They're happier, and their condition's generally better. The downside for the county as a whole is we're transporting well beyond the closest facility, and one of those 3 ambulances has to be back in the county. So it does stress our system to have to go to some of those outlying facilities.
Okay, now the only thing that may be a help is we do notify the patient when they get in the ambulance that they are going to go to hospital A as opposed to hospital B.
First, we add, depending on, again, generally it's going to go like this. What hospital would you like to go to? And they tell you, or we're going to take you to this hospital because your conditions, your blood pressure, your pulse, etc.
That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lawrence.
Okay. Somebody swiped my papers, so.
Oh, we had the one.
No, the papers for the grant. Back in August, I approached the board about applying for a